Thursday, the 4th of October, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So what you've done there, Mike, is on your very first syllable, you came in very high energy.
God, yes!
And then you've realised, I can't sustain that through even this first sentence.
Oh, I'm going to try.
You're going to deliver every
This
line.
is how we can tell how tired Mike is. He comes in high energy for the intro.
Yeah, I am
He's covering his tiredness.
Yeah.
fully having to put this on today because I have no energy reserves.
Is that the thing? Is it going in high energy on the intro? Is it that thing about, like, if you get a reputation as an early riser, you can sleep until midday every day and you'll never lose that reputation? So you impress upon people early that reputation.
Well, if
Just first impressions.
have you ever gone back and listened to like the first 6 or 7 episodes of the show?
No.
Well,
Not even Alice has.
I actually have, because every time we talk, like frequently when we talk about me not having listened to the back catalogue, I go back to number 1, and number 1 is fucking awful because you're all talking in monotone. Like,
It's so flat.
It's really
so flat because it's before we
and so
figured out.
I get through like 3 episodes. I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
You have to be.
I thought we covered some all right stuff on the first
The
one. didn't we?
stories are fine.
The content is fine.
It's just monotonous.
It's the attitude.
Right, gotcha. Yeah.
To sound normal on it, and you guys know this, but to sound normal on air, you have to be kind of 120, 150% of what you are if you were speaking to a person. But we didn't know that. Like the first 12 episodes or something.
Right.
So first 12 episodes, like, all right, Marsh, how are you? Oh, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, and it's really fucking flat. Really flat. Before we knew that, you had to be like, hey, for it to actually sound like
I just
a
attribute that to
normal
me
human being.
getting more of a dickhead over time, and then less again. I think I peaked a couple of years ago in terms of how much of a dickhead I was, and I'm now sort of slipping. I'm slipping into seriousness. I think this is the problem with doing a lot of serious kind of projects that I then talk about in the show. I've lost that sort of like serious dickhead edge.
Yeah. We need to revive your dickhead edge.
We need to bring back the dickhead edge, or bring in another dickhead, and just sort of like have a conveyor belt of like converting dickheads into serious people, like some sort of YTS scheme or some sort of young offender scheme.
So over the weekend, I watched Solo, the Star Wars movie.
I haven't
I
watched
went
that.
to see that in the cinema, I think.
Did you like it?
I think I did.
This is a film the two of you have seen that I've not seen.
I think I did like it.
I quite enjoyed it. It got some bad reviews at the time. But I quite enjoyed it, I think. The major problem that I had with it, and spoilers for Solo, the major problem, and if you haven't seen it by now...
I haven't seen it.
Well, if you haven't seen it by now, and you give enough of a shit about Star Wars to be annoyed by spoilers, then what the fuck are you doing? This was out ages ago.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, like, don't listen to this bit, because I'm sat in front of you. I can't not listen to this bit.
It entirely came out without fanfare at all. Nobody talked about it. It was out for like a week before I realised it was out.
It was.
I think that's because the other two didn't do that well. Certainly the what was it called? The other prequel that was non-connected to the whole
Rogue One.
Rogue One. There you go. That didn't do that well.
Rogue One did all right.
Oh, did it?
And Last Jedi did all right, and Force Awakens did all right. Solo's probably the first one that you could consider a flop. It's actually made a loss, as far as anyone can see.
Yeah.
Which for a Star Wars film is a first.
Yeah.
You know.
Has it had its own fan edit where they've cut out all the women? Did you see that happen?
I saw that happen
Which is
with
an astonishing thing.
Last Jedi, I think it was.
And you can read the guy's justification for each edit that he made, having taken like 40 minutes out of the film. One of his justifications is if there's ever anything said by a woman that at any other point in the film is also said by a man, the woman's bit can go, just keep the men's one.
Of course.
And like any plot point that's advanced by women need to get rid of.
Wait, what if the woman said it first?
Yeah. Still
Which
counts.
is just
Doesn't
like,
matter. Yeah.
just life in general.
That is a general statement, a general policy that he's taken. And also, he kills off poor Dameron because he can't otherwise explain what happens to him while taking all the women out of it.
Okay.
So he just goes, oh no, he died on that explosion. So there's an explosion. So, yeah, he must have died there. We don't ever see him again.
Wow.
Like the misogynist edit. I kind of want to see it because of what an absolute twat you'd have to be to do it.
But it did, Alice is right, it did come out with no fanfare. Absurdly enough, it came out in early May and did not come out on May the 4th, which is just, who the fuck, what marketing school did you go to? Jesus Christ.
I mean, I would have done that because the whole May the 4th thing annoys me.
I mean, it annoys you, but every Star Wars fan would have fucking loved it.
I reckon the Star Wars fans who'd like that film would be too cool for that. Would be like, oh yeah, very funny. Oh, come on. That's a bit obvious and trite, isn't it? You're not a real fan.
But the problem that I had with Solo is that it was basically wall-to-wall fan service. It was like...
See, I didn't get any of that because I haven't seen most of the film.
It's like, here he is getting his iconic blaster. Here he is meeting Chewbacca. Here's how he gets the Millennium Falcon.
Here's how he pisses off Greedo, I assume.
Kind of.
Oh, yeah. Right, I was joking, but okay.
I mean, like Greedo isn't involved, but there's a character who goes, hey, Han, if you're ever looking for work, there's a gangster on Tatooine who's putting a team together. You go, and it's like, that's Jabba, probably, and he ends up, and that's why Greedo and thing, and the Carbonite.
Greedo, Alice Greedo.
And all that kind of, so it's just, there's a lot of fans. Here he is meeting Lando Calrissian. Here he is with the fucking dice that he's got in the cockpit of.
Has he got dice in the cockpit?
Yeah, he's got like furry dice, but they're metal dice. But like he hangs them from the cockpit, and at the start of the film, they're in his car. Like, and I mean, it's a land speeder, because Star Wars, but they're in his fucking car. Space car. And like he leaves them behind, and he's got to get back to his girlfriend because she's got the dice, and they end up in the Millennium Falcon, so they've got to get back to this. Fucking fan service, wall to wall fan service all the way through. Which, if you're a Star Wars fan, you probably sit there fucking loving it. It's fine. What I thought was interesting about that, though, is that Last Jedi was slated by Star Wars fans for its lack of fan service. It was, Luke would never have said that, and how this thing, and that contradicts this, and so on and so forth. And they made a film that was wall-to-wall fan service. Should have been what every Star Wars fan was looking forward to, and fucking bombs.
Yeah.
Bombs at the box office completely.
Well, it's no way to write a film, is it? By sort of like consensus.
No.
And especially consensus of a pretty toxic fandom.
Yeah.
Like the most toxic elements of that fandom are pretty bad.
But as someone who knows Star Wars reasonably well and got all the fan service, it was like, that's great. And I quite enjoyed it as a film. It was all right as a film. It was okay. A little bit predictable, but it was all right. It was a good film.
I think I've watched any films. I watched it In Bruges again the other day. Nicola hadn't seen that. That's an all right film, but it's only 10 years old, and you see some of the terms that they use as like insults. You think, whoa, language has changed quickly.
Yeah.
I'm sure that stuff wasn't good 10 years ago, but we're still like, these are rogue characters who are like, they're wrong-uns anyway. But there's a lot of stuff that they say that's, even as a wrong-un, you don't want to put that in a film these days.
Yeah.
Come on, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, the murder's fine, but the language, no, steady on.
Well, yeah.
Well, we've talked about this not necessarily on the show before, but we have an not necessarily odd, but a questionable attitude to language because we are very much happy with most bad swear words, and we get accused of using swear words that we shouldn't. We swear too much on the show all the time. And then we all have quite a hard line on, no, you definitely shouldn't say that word. That's an offensive word to use. And get strongly adamant about do not use words that are offensive to individual groups of people.
Yeah. Well, it's not... I suppose offensive. Offensive is like an odd term for it, but they're ugly words, I think, but ugly in the sense of what they represent, whereas I don't think any coarse words, any swearing, are ugly in what they represent, really. There's a couple that you could say
there's a few that are in other countries that can have problems. Certainly gendered swear words can have problems. It's not a thing that's associated with them in Britain, but in other countries it can be.
We did have someone complain recently about us fucking swearing all the fucking time on the fucking show, which honestly just makes me want to do it more.
Yes, yeah. You get the... It's often you. Because you punctuate your thoughts with fuck.
I do.
But yeah, we get the occasional email saying, it's great, why don't you do it without the swearing? I said, well, why don't you do it without the swearing? If you want a show that doesn't swear, there's others out there. It's fine, it's all right.
You want to do exactly this kind of content without swearing in it, well, start a podcast, go for it. This is how we're doing it.
What you need to do is do a fanboy edit where you take an episode of the show and cut out all the swearing, even if it means some of the stories make absolutely no sense, and you have to completely change the direction some of the stories are going just to justify why it didn't involve swearing. I think you should absolutely do that.
Last month, I came across an article in my Google Alerts titled, "New research says lack of sex makes your vagina depressed."
Okay.
The article was published on the website Higher Perspective, which has the tagline Connect, Reveal, Transcend, and claims it seeks to bring together like-minded individuals focused on personal growth and expanding their consciousness.
When it says depressed, I assume they mean as in the mental state, the mood state, and not as in like the top of a lid of jam. Because you'd have thought, if anything, a lot of regular sex would have a depressing element with the amount of thrusting going on.
Do not use this vagina if the lid is not depressed.
So obviously it seemed like easy fodder for a potential podcast piece, so I bookmarked it and forgot about it. Then last week I needed to write a blog post for our website and was scrolling through my bookmarks looking for something easy. Vaginas or cancer are my go-to easy topics. I know the background well enough to be able to put my hands on research pretty easily. Innuendo, tick. So I clicked on the article and started to read. We all know that a healthy sex life keeps our immune system humming, lessens pain and relieves stress. It makes for a happier life, but what happens when we don't have sex?
Hold on.
The article began.
We all know that a healthy sex life keeps our immune system humming.
Out there early. First line of the article, they've got some random stuff in there.
Okay.
Well, according to new research, we can become depressed, or more specifically, our vaginas may become depressed. There was no link behind the new research claim. Maybe they'll mention it later down in the article. They say having a depressed vagina is a real condition backed by science. Those suffering from this condition experience burning and itching sensations despite there being no signs of an infection down there. Another reference to science, another failure to link to that science. They go on to say sexual abstinence can make our vagina depressed, and this can also lead to vaginal atrophy, which causes the vagina wall to become thin. Which is a slightly more concrete claim, at least. They still don't mention the study. But maybe at least that's something I can search for.
Vaginal atrophy seems like a weird term for it. I mean, I assume you're going to come to that later, but that seems like a very weird term for it.
Yeah.
It's not like a use it or lose it situation.
Well, some of these articles that I've come across seem to claim that. Very much seem to claim that. It's very bizarre. I scroll through the entire article looking for names of study researchers or universities or any other mention of where I might be able to find this apparent new research and found nothing. The article descended into a description of vaginal atrophy and some tips on how to treat or avoid it, but no indication of where this story actually came from. So
the tips on how to avoid it,
yeah.
If their thesis here, their central point is lack of sexual activity causes it,
yeah,
then you'd think the tips are going to be largely down to one or two or three things. Really, there's going to be a very short list of things to do, and they're all going to largely involve put something in there.
Well, so the problem is it starts with this thesis, and then it just goes into a description of the medical condition vaginal atrophy and talks about the general advice on how to deal with that condition. So there's this weird disconnect between this idea that seems to begin the story, but then the story immediately goes down an entirely different route.
Down a rabbit hole.
So it's very bizarre. So I started to Google around, and then I discovered how odd this story is. So first I wanted to see who else had covered the story in a similar time frame. And what I found were 3 other articles daisy-chained together. The first was on an Australian website that linked back to an article first published in the New York Post, and that article said it was first published in The Sun. All 3 of those articles mentioned a sex therapist by the name of Louise Mazzanti, but she wasn't mentioned at all in the Higher Perspectives article, nor was she mentioned in the whole stream of additional articles I found over the last 2 years talking about depressed vaginas. So there's these 4 from around the same time this year, and then there's a slew of them over the last 2 years talking about depressed vaginas. So we'll come back to Louise Mazzanti, but for now let's start with where the hell this idea of referring to a vagina as depressed came from. And I think many listeners might know where this is going already. I have poor background in popular culture, and this is not popular culture that you will have necessarily watched, but there will be listeners who will have spotted the link.
Okay.
If not, let me explain. Leaving aside the linked articles from August 2018, so these ones that I found recently, there were also a spate of articles from the summers of 2016, 2017, and earlier in the spring and summer of this year. I opened as many as I could see, particularly those from some of the more well-known sources. I had articles from the Daily Mail, The Sun, The Independent, The Reader's Digest, Maxim, Men's Health Magazine, Women's Health Magazine. And the vast majority of these articles didn't really reference any news as such.
Men's Health Magazine seems like a weird inclusion on
and
that
Maxim.
list. Yeah, but Men's Health in particular seems strange.
It's very much you should be having sex with your partner. She wants it. She needs it. Yep. It makes her vagina healthy.
And even if she says she doesn't need it, well, just point out to the fact that she'll lose her vagina if you don't get to regularly use it.
So none of these articles, well, most of these articles didn't really reference any specific news. The news was all related to, yes, your vagina can get depressed. That was the news. Yes, it's a real thing. And then they spent hundreds of words talking about a condition called vulvodynia. Vulvodynia is a well-known but perhaps not as well characterised chronic pain condition. People with vulvodynia experience pain in the vulva area. In most cases, the pain is limited to the vestibular region of the vulva, which includes the area between the inner labia, between the vaginal opening and the clitoris.
They call it the vestibular region, the vestibular
vestibule. Region. The vestibule of the vulva.
Like a porch.
You also have a vestibule in your ear.
Right. Okay.
Some doctors don't know the name of one of them.
Right.
So that particular form of the condition, which is the most common form of the condition, is usually referred to as vestibulodynia, which is a bit of a mouthful. In the majority of cases, vulvodynia is a provoked pain, which means that people with the condition tend to feel pain upon pressure. The pain can be relatively mild and make penetration of the vagina uncomfortable, but still possible. But then it can also be incredibly debilitating, making penetration of any sort impossible. It can make even certain clothing, such as wearing jeans, quite hard to wear because of the pressure of the material. And it can make certain seating positions, like riding a bike or a horse, can be uncomfortable.
I imagine riding a horse is uncomfortable anyway.
Yeah.
Also, it's like it's morally uncomfortable because they're evil. I don't want to put them to work because it just means that they're more likely to rise up in revolt.
Vulvodynia is thought to be incredibly common, and lots of people, like lots of gynecologists and experts in the field, will make mention of it being incredibly common. And it's possible that the majority of people with vaginas will experience some sort of provoked pain at some point in their lifetime. Although it's massively under-researched, and so we have no idea how many. The statistics on how many people this affects worldwide are almost entirely unknown. There is one study in America that suggests maybe 60% of women that they looked at. So potentially a majority of women.
6% over the course of their life rather than regularly?
Yeah.
Okay.
The causes of vulvodynia are largely unknown. Two of the prevailing ideas on the causes of vulvodynia relate either to muscular dysfunction or nerve dysfunction. In the case of muscular dysfunction, the idea is that the pain is caused by an unconscious clenching of the vaginal muscles, which leads to the build-up of pain.
Oh, like you get with your jaw if you clench your teeth.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
The muscles have become confused by how and when to tighten and how and when to relax. And if this is the cause of the vulvodynia, then physiotherapy can be an effective treatment, which might be combined with a biofeedback assessment, which just measures the electrical activity of the muscles, so that they can assess the activity of the muscles in that area. The idea of physiotherapy is to retrain the muscles to switch off and relax at certain times, which often relies on specific Kegel exercises. But one important thing to note is that the off period is almost as important as the on period, which is one of the many, many reasons why using Goop's jade egg is going to be detrimental. With the jade egg, you're continually activating the muscles to hold on to the egg and training your muscles to always be on, which might even cause vulvodynia.
They got into shit for that, though, didn't they? With the whole jade egg
they
thing.
They had to give a load of refunds.
Had to give refunds back and stuff, yeah.
I would argue if they got into shit, they're using it wrong.
They probably sell those black obsidian
butt plugs.
Crystal butt plugs.
Yeah, the obsidians.
That we've talked about before. But they're still selling them in their new shop that they just opened in London.
They probably just changed the claims.
They've changed the claims on it, yeah. Kegel exercises are best when you're switching between on and off. So most physiotherapists will tell you to do a 10 seconds hold and then 10 seconds relax. Physiotherapy might also include the use of vaginal dilators in increasing size gradients, again, to train the muscles when it's okay to relax. Mm-hmm. Importantly, this unconscious tensing of muscles might arise for psychological reasons, and it might be a response to damaging experiences a patient has encountered. So patients might benefit from additional psychotherapy to help manage the psychological aspects of the condition. Not only that those things might cause the vulvodynia, but vulvodynia can also affect the mental health of patients who experience vulva pain, particularly in our society where there's an expectation that real sex always involves putting a penis in a vagina.
Yeah.
Same sex doesn't count. Sex of other types of sex doesn't count.
Yeah.
Everything else is classed as foreplay. So there's an expectation for a person, particularly women, to provide sex for their partners in order to keep them happy, rather than, because they might want to. And that it is their duty as a partner, and all those societal pressures and many more can make a person's experiencing vulva pain feel inadequate and damage their mental health. I think if you're ever seeing a medical professional about vulvodynia and you have the opportunity for a referral to someone qualified to treat mental health problems in relation to that condition, it's worthwhile considering taking the opportunity. There are other treatment options for patients with vulvodynia, including Botox injection into the muscle, which helps the muscles relax. They think it's not very well researched. Topical anesthetic creams, they think work, not very well researched. And changes in hormonal contraception, particularly if it's suspected that endometriosis is playing a role in the symptoms. All treatments for vulvodynia have limited evidence for usefulness, but as with all chronic pain conditions, it's important for patients and doctors to work closely together to find options to help the patient manage the condition. In many, many cases, vulvodynia eventually passes, although it can take many years for this to happen. The second thought on potential cause of vulvodynia is that it might be related to nerve damage somewhere in the body, which might be a result of experiencing other forms of chronic pain, or it might be a response to tissue damage in that area. Neuropathic pain can come from the nerves registering pressure as pain by mistake and can be very uncomfortable. And it's the treatment for this potential cause of vulvodynia that I think leads to the misnomer of vaginal depression.
Okay.
It turns out the vast majority of articles that mention the term vaginal depression also mention an apparently famous episode of a TV series called Sex and the City. Right. In this episode, Charlotte experiences vulva pain, goes to see her doctor, and talks about the experience with her friends. All of that's great, positive, normalising open discussion about topics and normalising visiting a doctor if you're experiencing pain is good. But she then mentions that her doctor puts her on antidepressants, leading to the question, is your vagina depressed?
Okay, right.
And nearly 15 years after Sex and the City ended, the mainstream media are still referring to vulva pain, which potentially affects over 50% of people with vaginas, as vaginal depression.
Well, one assumes the antidepressants were not prescribed for their antidepressant properties.
Correct. So this is a massive misnomer, because although tricyclic antidepressants are used to treat neuropathic pain, including vulvodynia, or at least the type of vulvodynia that might be neuropathic in origin, they're not given in doses high enough for the medication to have antidepressant effect.
So this is more about the sort of side effect type stuff.
Exactly.
I guess the same way that they use contraceptive pill to deal with things like endometriosis, which is not necessarily for the to avoid pregnancy, it's to deal with a condition you have.
Correct, yeah. So these medications are given because at lower dose, they have a secondary effect. They act as pain modifiers and alter how the body responds to pain. And they also have, some of them also have activity in helping with sleep problems. So actually, most patients who have experienced any sort of chronic pain will have probably tried or been recommended a TCA, tricyclic antidepressant called amitriptyline. Huge proportion of patients with pain are given amitriptyline because it helps you sleep and it modifies your pain.
Have you had that? You're in a lot of pain?
Yeah, I've been on amitriptyline on and off for years. And now I'm on a sister drug to it, nortriptyline, which has less of the drowsy effects because I find I'm very sensitive to the drowsy effects of amitriptyline. So the prescription of these medications has nothing to do with vulvodynia necessarily having anything to do with depression, although depression is more common in patients suffering chronic pain, which may be a cause, effect, or a coincidence. And I suspect the main reason for these articles popping up in the last 2 years is related to that announcement and subsequent cancellation of the third Sex and the City film. Either that...
Was there going to be a third film?
Yeah.
I don't even see that. I mean, this is not on my radar, it turns out.
Yeah, I've literally only found this out by digging, but they announced a new film in 2016 when these articles started, and they canned the film in 2017.
Was the film going to be called like Sex and the City 3, The Depressed Vagina? Because that might explain a lot.
I've never seen so much as a frame of Sex and the City.
I haven't seen any of it.
Actually, isn't it Sex and the City?
Sex and the City, yeah.
Yes,
and everyone calls it Sex in the City because people say sex and like fish and chips.
No, the city.
Sex and the City.
Yeah, Sex and the City, which makes it sound like saying Sex in the City.
Or Sexing the City.
Or you're doing sex.
Doing sex to
a city. Yeah.
But it has such a massive cultural relevance, particularly when it comes to talking about sex. Like, that is where vibrators became acceptable. That the reason vibrators are acceptable now is because they talked about them on Sex
was it
and the
them
City.
who popularised the rampant rabbit?
Exactly, yeah. And gradually they did introduce certainly British society to talking more openly about sex. But still, 15 years later, that's our cultural reference for some of these topics because we still don't branch out in any other way. Either it's because of the film or the mainstream media have decided that the existence of vulvar pain is so infrequently discussed, despite how common it probably is, leads to the very existence of the condition being newsworthy. Because most of the studies discussed in the articles are old. One was from 1983.
Right. Okay.
And they were like, a new study finds.
Yeah, really, they were touting it as new, and it's my age.
Whenever they said a new study, they didn't link it.
Yeah.
And then the next study they did link might be one of these really old ones.
Gotcha.
So they weren't necessarily pinning that to the new study, but they didn't have a new study. They were just saying new study. Yeah. There's literally no new study about this. I don't really have a problem with the mainstream media talking openly about pain that affects a large proportion of the population. In fact, discussing vulvodynia is important, especially if it encourages people suffering silently with pain to see a doctor. Mm-hmm. But what I do have a problem with them saying is that in order to prevent vulvodynia or vaginal atrophy, which is an unrelated condition that I'll come to in a moment, we all need to be having more sex. So if this isn't long enough, the second part of my story is about vaginal atrophy.
That's fine. Me and Mike don't want to do a story this week, so take it away, Alice.
The most recent stories, so these stories from August this year,
yes,
are largely related to a condition sometimes referred to as vaginal atrophy. The Sun article, which I believe was the original source for these stories, was originally published in March, and they put it delightfully. They say, the horrifying thing that can happen to your vagina if you don't have enough sex.
What? The horrifying thing?
And how self-love is just as important.
I mean, the only way to put horrifying and vagina in that kind of headline would be the horrifying thing that can happen if you do have sex, and it'd be a picture of a baby. It's like, this is what can happen if you have sex.
Vaginal atrophy and vulvodynia are two entirely separate conditions, but a few of these articles do conflate the two a little bit, or at least they kind of they lump them together. And while vaginal atrophy sounds quite distressing from the phrasing, it's actually an incredibly common part of aging.
Well, I thought it sounded horrifying.
We've known since at least the late 1940s, when the first clinical studies were published on the topic, that many postmenopausal women experience vaginal atrophy. In fact, we know that as many as 50% of people with vaginas who have gone through the menopause experience symptoms of this condition. Atrophic vaginitis, or vaginal atrophy, happens when the vaginal walls thin due to a reduction in estrogen associated with menopause. That is the cause. We know that is the cause. Symptoms include vaginal irritation, discomfort, itchiness, or a burning sensation, discomfort during sex, a reduced sex drive, difficulty getting aroused and reaching orgasm. The surface of the vagina looks pale and thin. You get a narrowing or shortening of the vagina, needing to pee more than usual, repeated urinary tract infections, and many of the symptoms are related to the vaginal dryness that goes hand in hand with the condition.
So if it's related to menopause and hormonal changes, that means HRT would be an effective treatment to prevent it happening effective? When you start to go through, when you're kind of premenopausal, you switch to HRT and it shouldn't happen?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Many of the other symptoms that are related to vaginal dryness can be mitigated by the use of lubricants, vaginal moisturizers, or vaginal estrogen. And yes, in some cases, hormone replacement therapy. There is one study that says that people who experience painful sex during or after the menopause might have been less sexually active in the lead up to that menopausal period. It's not a recent study. It was published in 2011. Nor is it conclusive on any causal link between sex frequency and pain during sex. I mean, there might be a causal link between sex frequency and pain during sex,
exactly.
just the other way around.
And if they're saying it's supposed that there might have been a decrease in sex going into that like menopausal period, but if that's in the sort of premenopausal period where hormones are all over the place anyway, then that would sort of account for it rather than saying the lack of sex caused stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awful.
And it doesn't say anything about premenopausal people. So this is patients who have painful sex during or after the menopause and the frequency of which they had sex before they went through the menopause. So it's entirely irrelevant to these news stories about having more sex to prevent horrifying vaginal atrophy. Mm-hmm. What the stories say about preventing vaginal atrophy, it turns out most of them mention Louise Mazzanti, who is described as a London-based sex therapist. And she says it is very important that we have a healthy sex life with a partner or with ourselves. So at least she's not putting pressure on socially acceptable forms of sex. She goes on to say, people very often say, I don't have a sex life because I don't have a partner, but forget about that and have a sexual relationship with yourself. It's about using massage and touching the tissue so that it becomes alive, the blood flows, and the tissue becomes elastic. It is really about exercising the tissue, which is probably reasonable advice. But right at the bottom of the article is a link to Louise Mazzanti's new book.
Yeah, of course.
Real Sex, Why Everything You Learned About Sex Is Wrong. Well, she didn't say too much wrong in the Sun article. Louise's website does lead to a few causes for concern. She shares her business with her husband, Mike Luzada, and on their website, they describe themselves as love revolutionaries.
Oh, that's not great, is it?
They say, your relationship with intimacy is a microcosm of your relationship with life itself. Life is capitalized. Deep intimacy opens us to our greatest vulnerabilities and our most powerful gifts. Are you ready to transform your relationship with life? Mike Luzada and Louise Mazzanti say that they use psychosexual somatics approach, which according to psychosexualsomatics.com is an evolutionary body-oriented therapeutic modality dealing with sexual and intimacy issues developed by Mike Luzada.
So they've taken the word psychosomatic and put sex in the middle of it. But isn't psychosomatic essentially it's all just caused by your brain rather than any physiological effect anyway? Isn't that what the definition of psychosomatic sort of is?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
They say it differs from regular sex therapy because conventional sex therapy arrives from the medical model, which focuses on function and dysfunction and on pathologization. It assumes that if desire, brackets I want to have sex, arousal, my body responds to desire, and function, I can get erect/orgasm.
What?
Okay.
Because that's the definition of sexual function. Obviously.
Those are very much two ends of the spectrum when it comes to the direct physical stimulation. Certainly male, anyway.
If desire, arousal and function are all working okay, then sex should be working just fine. It makes sex into a black box that doesn't need to be talked about directly. They say, during a session, a psychosexual somatics practitioner works with the cognitive, affective, somatic and transpersonal. The emphasis is on the client finding their own erotic energy, not on the practitioner doing something to them. According to her bio, Louise Mazzanti is passionate about life, evolution, awakening consciousness, and the profound changes that are happening at both personal, collective, and global scales.
Imagine that being your bio. Whereas mine says, like, he went to Liverpool University and he worked in marketing. She's like, no, profound consciousness skills.
It does talk about her academic background.
Okay.
So it says, over the last decade, she's transformed herself from a successful academic. Side note here.
Into an unsuccessful academic.
Well, no. She's moved out of her area of expertise. She has a PhD, unrelated entirely to the sex therapy business, although the Sun do refer to her as doctor. I think she probably tries to stay away from that.
Yeah.
But the Sun did refer to her as doctor.
What's a PhD in?
Art and design.
Brilliant. Good. Of course it is.
Good.
I was going to joke and say it was in like electrical engineering or something like that, something unrelated, but no, art and design's even more unrelated. That's amazing.
So it says, over the last decade, she's transformed herself from a successful academic to being an international expert in sex, intimacy and consciousness, touching the lives of clients and students in a way that has been profoundly impactful. I just think people should be banned from using the word impactful. I hate that word. Her work is knowledge-based yet highly intuitive and is building a bridge.
Knowledge-based yet highly intuitive. It sounds like fucking what you'd say in a job interview or something like that. Is the next thing. Her work functions well as a team, but also strong individually. You know, it just seems like the kind of Barnum statements everyone offers at a job interview.
It would be better if her next sentence was that. It says, she's building a bridge between Western philosophy and psychology and Eastern esoteric traditions and shamanism.
Well, a design degree will come in quite useful for that bridge.
She sees sexuality as a gateway to connect with immense untapped resources for personal growth, and this unique combination gives her powerful tools to offer transformational work.
I'm not convinced that that's all that unique. That she's saying like being in touch with yourself sexually will make you a happier, more rounded person. Isn't that unique an insight? She's just wrapping it up in all sorts of
just words, just
bullshit
too many
language
words
around the edge of it. Yeah,
it's also a little bit shamey to people who are just straight up asexual and have got no interest in this whatsoever.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Of course.
Her work, so her approach is apparently based on the premise that sexual energy is an expression of life force energy that naturally flows through our bodies. Louise provides an opportunity for you to experience yourself in a new way, being able to let go of patterns of shame, fear, or guilt around your sexuality. Apparently, her work is experiential and a combination between talk and gentle bodywork approaches using light touch, breath, sound, and movement techniques.
She's wanking people off, isn't she? That's what she's doing.
I think it's possible. It's genuinely, from the descriptions of psychosexual therapy that I've read, and we'll come back to it in a moment, but there's a few other ones that they claim to be like influences in their technique that have been accused of potentially being damaging to patients and not very ethical.
Yeah, a lot of this language just seems like a very flowery way of saying you'll be wanked off by an art teacher.
The website says Louise Mazzanti, PhD, left a stellar international career as a professor in art and design after a spiritual awakening that made her question most of her life goals. After years of intellectual achievements, she realised that she had compromised things essential for her happiness and well-being, the connection with her body, her sexuality, her identity as a woman, and her spirituality.
Oh, God, Alice, I don't think you've said anything in 2 pages that wasn't like bullshit empty platitude.
It seems she had this spiritual awakening after meeting her husband, Mike Lazada.
Do you have anything on his background?
Uh-huh. Do you want to guess what his job was?
Oh, God. I mean, this could go anywhere. Was he a gardener?
Mike was an investment banker.
Right. Okay.
But whilst working as an investment banker, he also practiced meditation and began exploring shamanism. After a profound spiritual awakening
By which he means a lot of coke.
that led him to search for deeper meaning and purpose in his life, he left the stability of this conventional life to forge a new path for himself.
Hang on, he wanted deeper meaning and more purpose than investment banking. I mean, I don't think you can get more meaning in your life than investment banking.
He decided to train as a psychosynthesis counsellor, having been transformed through his own personal therapy process, and to explore his own sexuality more deeply in Tantra workshops. Psychosynthesis
Tantra workshops.
Would be an entirely separate episode. Tantra workshops, entirely separate episode. There's so much here. Apparently, Mike is a qualified counsellor and a California state-approved clinical sexologist, sex coach, and sex educator, and holds several massage qualifications.
Okay.
He is the former chair of the SIS, the Association of Somatic and Integrative Sexologists.
That's just him and his wife, isn't it?
The professional body for somatic sexology, which he co-founded with a group of his peers.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Even his mates.
Were these peers in the sex world or peers in the investment banking world?
His psychotherapeutic influences come from many different schools, including psychosynthesis, body psychotherapy, bioenergetics, Babette Rothschild's somatic trauma therapy.
What the hell is that?
Peter Levine's somatic experiencing technique, and psychosexual therapy. Basically all of the woo. It's like woo on top of woo on top of woo. So we've got like a massive list of topics for future.
If you don't come back in a future episode and tell me who Babette Rothschild and Peter Levine were.
Mike has undertaken a study of many spirituality disciplines and healing methods, including meditation, tantra, Taoism, Buddhism, shamanism, and energetic healing. Like, when you get into the depths of their website, it is all bullshit all the way down. But on the surface, and certainly in the media, this couple are being portrayed as experts in sex and relationship therapy. Louise is even on UK terrestrial TV channels. She's touted as an expert on Channel 5, I think, and I think she's also been on ITV as well from time to time.
I don't think you need a lot of qualification to declare yourself a sex expert.
No, and it is a huge problem in the world of sex and relationships. Anyway, there are a lot of sexperts and sex therapists who don't necessarily have any qualifications.
And even the ones who do can be a little bit dicey. I've seen a fair few come up that are pretty dicey in their in some of the bad PR stuff that I do. But they're always the ones who are hired in voices for Love Honey or one of those prolific PR type companies.
She's so Louise is portrayed as doctor, despite her doctorate being irrelevant. Although this reference is sporadic, and it does seem that she tries to distance herself from using the title in relation to sex therapy, but that doesn't stop the general media from doing it.
It depends whether, like, if she was introduced on TV as doctor, would she say, actually, I've got a doctor in art? Or would she go like, oh, well, and just carry on? There's a difference between you not putting yourself forward as a doctor and you not stopping other people putting you forward as a doctor. You're correcting people,
Their explanation of psychosexual somatics, at least through their separate website on psychosexual somatics and through the section on their website related to that, uses vague, medicalized and science-based language, which makes it seem much more legitimate than it really is. And then they're out and about touting potentially distressing ideas like having lots of sex is important if you want to keep your vagina healthy.
Stop it atrophying.
Louise didn't necessarily use the words, but she's associated with articles referring to vaginal atrophy as horrifying, which is, a dangerous thing to say when it's a condition that's actually very common, very treatable, very manageable. Oh, and didn't you know you can pay for Skype sessions or buy her book? Whether it's intentional or not, it's profiteering of the worst kind and entirely inconsistent with the idea of healthy and happy relationships and sex positivity. So if you want to avoid vaginal depression, the best thing you can do is ignore any article telling you anything about how your sex life is supposed to be.
So QED is very soon, Marsh.
It is very soon. It's
very,
like
very
a week
soon.
and a couple of days away as this show goes out.
And we've announced an awful lot of stuff recently.
We have. There'll just be a flood of things being announced over the next couple of days. Probably most of it already out by now, but we've got further announcements as of
We've announced our astronomy workshop, our video game panel. We've announced our environmentalism panel.
That's true.
It's the stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff. We're really hurtling through the announcements at the moment. So if you want to know what they all are, it would take forever if we went through them on the show at the moment. So if you want to know what they are, you should probably go to qdcom.org.
The list of people speaking at QD is massive now. If
you
look at that page, as we add all the panelists and podcasts and various bits and bobs, it's getting bigger and bigger. Don't look at us like that, Alice.
I counted specific things related just to the QED, so not even the QED Fringe or the Saturday Night Entertainment, and there's 30 separate things.
Yeah, there's more than that coming as well. There's a few things you haven't seen. I don't think,
but that means, in practical terms, that I've not written a story for the show. Because I haven't had the time. I've been on QED like relentlessly for weeks now.
And I've not written a story for the show because I did a massive story last week. Absolutely huge.
And you're just like,
I ranted the entire hour of the show.
Fuck it, who cares?
Yeah, I can just sit back. Sit back. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to rest on my laurels.
Good.
Because very few people can afford to rest on their laurels.
Good.
But I've hit that price point where my laurels have crossed over into affordability.
Speaking of laurels,
Okay.
Have you seen the trailer for the Laurel and Hardy biopic?
I haven't, even though it was made by our very good friend Matt White, who makes our QED intro videos and various other things as well. I've not had a chance to see it.
And I've seen the trailer for it, and it looks really good. I mean, I like Laurel and Hardy anyway. I'm a bit of a Laurel and Hardy fan. So I really enjoy this stuff, but Steve Coogan really nails Stan Laurel for me. Like, really nails. He's resting on his Stan Laurels.
Stan Laurel went to school or lived for a while in the place I went to school in Bishop Auckland.
Yeah, he was born in Ullswater, I think, up kind of Carlisle-ish.
He was, and then he moved across to Bishop Auckland where he went to school. There's a house and things there.
And people seem to think he's American, but he's not.
That's to
the one. To the one, that's good. But because we've not done stories, Alice has found a load of listener questions for us to talk about, so we're not shortchanging people on runtime. We're shortchanging them on content. Absolutely shortchanging them on content, but not shortchanging them on runtime. So we've got some listener questions. So the first question comes from Hayley, from Hayley Stevens. She says...
From Hayley Stevens. Oh, Hayley. It comes from Hayley Stevens. It's not like you're saying it comes from Hayley from Hayley Stevens. Like she is from Hayley Stevens, the entity of Hayley Stevens.
That was me just being a little bit colloquial in our thing. It's from Hayley, because, we all know Hayley.
We know Hayley.
But if you don't, it's Hayley Stevens.
This is Hayley from HayleyStevens.net. It's not .net.
Hayley says, as it's the lead up to Halloween, have any of you ever had a scary or spooky experience that you could not find an explanation for?
Depends what you mean by I can't find an explanation for. I can't attribute it to anything concrete, but I can put some best guess stuff in there. But I remember walking through the woods when I'd have been about 8 or something like that. And I might have told this story before.
Possibly.
And seeing what I thought was a ghost in the woods, and it was a ghost specifically that my school teacher had talked about. How someone in her family had stayed in a place and they'd seen this ghost, and it was they knew that the woman was from that house because there was a picture of her on the wall, but she only and the ghost when she appeared was only from the waist down. And I remember thinking at the time, and 7 or 8 or whatever I was, thinking, well, I wonder if the reason that they only saw her from the waist down is because the picture they'd seen on the wall was of her. Hadn't seen it from the waist down, really, only from the waist up.
Yes.
It'd be weird if you had a picture from the waist down.
Somebody's leg.
Just like a ghost appears from the waist down. Like, right, well, this is not a scary ghost. This is a very weird ghost. But yes, so they talk about that, and then I remember walking through the woods with some friends and seeing that ghost, having already rationalised it previously as being, I bet this is just because they only saw the picture of her. But actually, I think looking back, I'm not sure I did see that, but convinced myself that I was going to see that. Didn't see it at the time, but still ran out of the woods scared as a kid does with his friends anyway. And it's only in retrospect that as I look back over time that I put the image in there to explain, so like retrofitting the story. I'm pretty sure that's what happens now I've had a chance to reflect on it. But at the time, I don't think it was. Later, I did think it was. And subsequently, I've realised that at the time, I didn't think it was anyway.
Yeah.
So, that's probably the closest I get in terms of an experience that I can articulate, other than the sense of like a weird creepiness and various things like that. Alice?
I've had stuff that I couldn't attribute and then could. Kind of similarly, but in a much shorter timescale. There was an occasion when I was at my parents' house when Warren was visiting, and Warren had gone into the other room to sleep because we actually followed the rules that my parents set that we weren't allowed to sleep in the same room.
Absolute mugs.
And I heard this weird tapping on my window, which I lay there thinking, there's got to be a reason for this, trying to rationalise what it was, but there's no tree outside my bedroom window, and there was no rational explanation I could come up with. So I called Warren and made him come back into the room to check what it was. And it turned out I'd had something hung on the window handle. I'd had the window open, and then when I closed the window, the thing had been trapped on the outside and was rattling on the outside of the window.
Okay.
But at the time, I couldn't attribute it to anything because it's like, but there's nothing outside my window. There shouldn't be anything that's tapping on the window. Nothing else interesting, really.
Yeah, I've had the occasional nightmare as well. But see, even then with like nightmares, you wake up in like absolute terror. I don't turn the light on. I lie there still and rationalise it to a point where I can relax in it rather than be like, turn the light on. Like, nope, come on. You know it was nothing. Get yourself calmed down. This is absolutely fine. Yeah. How about you, Mike?
Yeah. No, I don't think, and nothing comes to mind of something that, was a spooky experience. I've had spooky experiences, but I've always Nothing comes to mind of something where I've not figured out what it was. I've had sleep paralysis. I've talked about that on the show before. I've had sleep paralysis.
I had sleep paralysis for the first time ever recently, and it was terrifying. Partly because I was lying on my side, and
which is quite uncommon for sleep paralysis. Yeah.
I think I think in my brain I knew something weird was happening, but I couldn't attribute it to sleep paralysis. I didn't attribute it to sleep paralysis until a few days later because I was lying on my side. I didn't have any weird or creepy like hallucinations or anything around it.
Did you feel like a weight on you, like a black mass weight on you? Because it was probably the dog. I feel like a weight on my chest and I can't move. It's just your dog, Alice.
The dog was right behind me.
Oh, okay.
But I felt like I woke up several times and couldn't get out of my body. I couldn't get up off the sofa, and then I drifted back to sleep and would imagine I was up and out off the sofa, walking around the room, and then I would suddenly realize I was still inside my body and I couldn't. Frightening because I was like, when's this going to end? I won't get up. How do I force this to stop?
I also saw a UFO once, where I was up a mountain in Wales camping, and because it was up in a mountain, there was no light pollution around, so the star field above us was like fucking astonishing. The number of stars that you don't realise you don't see when you live in cities.
Yeah.
And then you go up a mountain, it's like, Jesus Christ, there's a lot of fucking stars.
Amazing, isn't it?
And you could see the Milky Way is this big kind of stripe across the sky. It's like, that's the rest of the galaxy there.
Yeah,
nice. That's good.
There's the neighbours.
But there was a tiny, tiny little point of light that I kind of saw like shooting across the sky. And initially I thought, I wonder if that's a satellite or something. I mean, it'd be hard for me to see a satellite, but maybe if it was glinting in the right way, etc., 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 etc. But then it stopped and turned around. And then went back on itself, and then stopped and turned around, and then went back on itself, and it was like describing a figure 8 in the sky. And I was watching it for ages and ages and ages. Go, what the fucking hell could that be? And I talked about it on the show and said, I've never figured out what it was. And a listener wrote in and said, that's what a geostationary satellite looks like. Geostationary satellite isn't static in the sky, it describes a figure 8. And it was like, so it was a satellite.
Nice.
And the reason why it didn't just like hurtle across the sky and disappear is because if it's geostationary satellite will describe a figure 8 in the sky, presumably because of a precession or whatever, that kind of stuff. So that's probably the closest I've got is the sleep paralysis thing, both of which I've got explanations for. I love creepy stuff.
I think I dismiss a lot of it. If now when you say things in the sky, I'm sure I've seen things in the sky that I couldn't explain and gone,
nah.
There's probably an explanation for it. I don't need to know what it is.
I mean, I don't know what any of the stars are, so I'm quite used to looking up at the sky and going like, oh, there's a light that I don't know what it is. So something goes in that box, basically. Yeah.
That's a no is the answer. Very long way of going no.
We're boring.
No.
It's probably why we didn't get into skepticism, having been believers of like very weird woos.
Yeah.
Very, very strange kind of.
I was kind of into ghosts and UFOs and Loch Ness Monster and stuff like that until I was about 13, 14 when I kind of thought, you know what, maybe not. And I had all those kind of mysteries of the unknown and
I had
the Osborne supernatural world, those kind of books that
I don't know that I ever believed them though. I don't know that I believed them.
I fully bought them. And loved them for it. And I remember I made having seen a thing in a book. I think it was like Mysteries of the Unknown. It was an Osborne book called Mysteries of the Unknown, which I've been trying to find another copy of recently because I'd love to read it. It had Jeff the Talking Mongoose in it. It was where I first saw the Jeff the Talking Mongoose story. And it had a story in it about a guy who was attacked in a haunted house, and he had this kind of vision of a face appear above him, kind of go, ah! And it was just creepy as hell face, and it scared the hell out of me. And it's years later I realised it was a picture of
Richard Wiseman.
I think it's Lon Chaney in Phantom of the Opera.
Oh,
and they'd use that picture as and an artist had kind of used it as reference and painted this scary ghost. And it was a really creepy picture. So fucking hell, that's really scary. But I'd seen in this book, towards the first part of this book was like monsters. The second part of the book was ghosts, and the third part of the book was kind of UFOs, paranormal, ESP, etc., etc., etc. And one of the things that it was talking about hooking up polygraphs and galvanometers to plants.
Yeah.
And then you go and you go, a fucking plant, and it goes, and
a plant is in like a living,
plant is scared.
A living green creature rather than someone who has been like a stooge. Well, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
An organism rather than like a stooge who's been placed there.
No, not that kind of plant. But that they would go in and you would shout at the plant, be angry at the plant.
Not Lindela plant.
You wave fire at the plant, and the galvanometer will react, or the polygraph will react, because the plant
Henry
knows,
Plantagenet.
and it's scared and that kind of thing. So I made a galvanometer after an electronic set that I had. I made my own galvanometer and went round and stuck it into bits of like rubber plant, going like that, and listen to it.
Into rubber plant.
Listen to it going and going. Plant's alive in it. I went round and I would grab the plant and I'd wiggle it and it would go. I'd go.
You're right that it was alive.
I would go, yeah. But I would go, and the plant is scared because I'm shaking it. It's probably just the wires are flapping about the place because I'm wobbling the plant. But I started going around and I decided that if the galvanometer made a noise, it meant whatever it was alive. I don't know where I came to this conclusion, but that's what I decided. So I was going in and like stick it in the lettuce in the fridge. It's still alive, isn't it? We eat it alive. Must be terrified. Just go around, stick it in a bit of plant. I eventually stuck it in a bit of pickled beetroot. Silence. And I was like, fucking hell, beetroot's grim, innit? Fucking hell. Dead.
And you've never eaten
completely
beetroot
dead.
since.
Never eaten beetroot
I'm surprised beetroot wasn't conductive. I thought what was stopping it being conductive, I wonder?
I have no idea.
Is vinegar not conductive?
Possibly not.
Or is it the beatiness
or
of
maybe the beetroot is just dead.
Purple. It's purple.
It's just
purple is non-conductive.
I mean, yeah, I probably should have been able to tell it was dead because it had gone purple, but you know.
Same with Prince.
Another question. No Scope Comics says, you've talked a lot about the unreliability of self-reported pain surveys designed to test the placebo hypothesis. Is there any other way of monitoring and quantifying pain? No.
Yeah, there really isn't.
I mean, there kind of is. You could do functional MRIs. So you stick someone in an MRI and then give them pain stimulus and you can see where the blood flow is in the brain. But it's a bit of a blunt instrument.
It's basically like sticking your galvanometer into a...
Yeah. It's a really blunt instrument. Yeah. We kind of don't know what we're doing.
You just know that there's blood flow in that area. You don't know anything about it,
and you can't measure pain at that point because measure suggests quantifiable.
Yeah. And the blood flow is in the brain could be a response to the expectation of pain or the anticipation of pain or your belief of how much pain you're in, regardless of how much pain you're actually in, and etc. So there's all sorts of
being in an fMRI machine.
Well, yeah. So there's all sorts of confounding factors there.
When I was researching this story for this episode, I was plugging in lots of different search terms into PubMed related to vulvodynia and vulval pain and things like that. And I came across one article which referred to women and self-reported neuropathic pain in the title of this paper. It's like, but all neuropathic pain is self-reported. You're basically saying women are liars in that headline, or at least giving the impression that that's what you believe, because pain is self-reported. Yeah. It's the only way we can measure pain.
So whenever you said vulva pain, it made me think that would be an excellent name for like an 80s wrestler.
So there's a reason why all these pain studies that we talk about are self-reported, because it's basically the only way to do it. The only way to measure pain is how much pain you're in on a scale of 1 to 10, because that's the only thing we have.
When we talk about placebo, actually one of the things placebo might be useful for is something like pain, because it is almost entirely subjective and we can't measure it, and basically all you can do is give a patient something and hope that they feel better, and if they report they feel better, even if it is from other biases.
The subjectivity of pain is always an interesting one as well for me, not least because isn't it true that you measure pain in your memory as much as anything else, like your memory of the pain you were in? What am I trying to say here? if you can be in X amount of pain, but if afterwards something happens that modifies how you remembered it, you do start thinking that you report that you were in less pain.
Yeah. Most people don't minimize their pain in their memory.
But there was a study, that was it, with colonoscopies, I think it was. And what they found was the most painful bit is the bit during the middle of the procedure. And then the retraction of the instrument, done fairly quickly, is relatively painless by comparison to the middle bit. But what they found was that the removal of the instrument quite quickly, the patients reported the whole procedure to be more painful. Whereas if you left it in a bit and like on the way out, if you left it a bit longer for absolutely no reason, but it just means that the bit at the end of the operation, the end of the procedure, is the least painful, is a longer version of a not painful bit.
Yeah.
They report the entire procedure as being less painful because the memory of the end is how they gauge the entire sort of procedure in terms of painfulness.
Yeah, it makes sense. This is related to why I often say that for me, in my experience of chronic pain, when I get a new pain, or a pain reappears that I haven't had for a while, and it's consistent, it takes 2 weeks for me to acclimate that as my new normal. And I have no idea whether the pain gets less after 2 weeks or I'm used to the pain after 2 weeks, and therefore I see it as way less than it was a week before.
You might actually be in no pain. What's happening is you're like, oh yeah, after 2 weeks I find that I'm able to ignore the pain. No, it's gone out. You don't even have a pain condition. You've just been looking at this wrong this entire time. You just have an ache for a fortnight.
One thing that is interesting, though, is that pain threshold, when you're experiencing pain for a long period of time, your pain thresholds go a lot higher. So I always remember having, for one of my physiology lab practicals as an undergrad, they I can't even remember what the test was now, but they stuck an electrical thing on my arm.
Were they trying to see if you were alive or not?
On the nerve to try and get my thumb to twitch. So you put it on your arm and then you stimulate the nerve with the electrical stuff, and it's supposed to make your thumb twitch in. And the actual lecturer put it on my arm and he amped it up and he amped it up and he amped it up and nothing's happening. And he amped it up and up and up and he said, I'm not supposed to go this high. Like, grown men would be screaming at this point. I'm like, well, I don't really know what's happening in this stage. And eventually got this really feeble twitch of my thumb from it because apparently my nerves are just slightly fucked.
Your nerves are shot. Fun. Nick says, are there any surprising things that you've held to be true only to find out that they're nonsense, or vice versa when you've applied some skepticism?
Blue pills are better for depression.
Which wasn't even in the book. Wasn't even in the book.
I mean, we have all said that at one point, haven't we? We've all said all of those things.
Oh, the placebo chapter from Bad Science, absolutely.
Yeah, oh man.
I used to think that if you stuck a galvanometer into beetroot, it was dead. It probably was dead, but not because of the galvanometer.
I went to a church school, but I was never, I only got a bit religious when I thought that it would make my mum happy. I think,
right.
I read back my old school reports from, religion classes from when I was very, very young, and it's pretty clear that I was that annoying kid that asked a load of questions and didn't really believe anything and thought it was all bollocks. From the way they phrased my interest in those classes. But then I remember being a teenager and feeling like I was quite religious, but I don't think I was. I think I just kind of liked the idea of it more than anything, and then grew out of it.
On a similar point, No Scope Comics also says, have you ever dismissed something which turned out to be true? I've been accused of lumping osteopathy in with chiropractic, but is one more true than the other? Which
one is more true than the other.
It kind of is. Osteopathy, particularly, is a peculiar one.
Yeah, it depends where you are as well.
It's still got a lot of woo in it, though.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's got a huge amount of woo in it, especially once they get towards things like craniosacral therapy, cranial osteopathy, that kind of stuff. And what we found with good thinking, looking into it, is that the osteopaths in the UK are just as likely, if not more likely, than chiropractors to be making completely misleading claims around all sorts of stuff to do with colic and autism and vaccines and all sorts of stuff like that. We've seen a huge amount of that. So it kind of depends where you are. Because I think in America, osteopaths have to do a bit of bullshit and also some actual medicine.
Yeah, American osteopathy. So osteopathy started off back in the day where it was invented out of whole cloth by some fucker. And it split back then into the British school and the American school, effectively. And the British school has stayed more or less the same. And the American school has slowly incorporated more evidence-based practice over time until a point now where an American doctor of osteopathy basically has a full medical degree. There's a side of bullshit in there where there's all this, and there's structure and nerves and so on and so forth.
But at that point, is that still a full medical degree? If you haven't done the full degree, presumably, because you've taken lots of modules from real medicine, but for some of those modules instead you did bullshit.
And you've done a little bit of bullshit, but
you've done bullshit instead of real medicine at that time.
Yeah. But it's almost equivalent. It's not. But it's almost equivalent at this point, and a doctor of osteopathy will probably actually give you a reasonable shout on a diagnosis. From America, the ones in the UK are just straight up quacks.
Yes, yeah.
The ones in the US are, probably got a reasonable degree, a reasonable understanding of medicine, and a good side of quackery. I would still personally just go and see a medical doctor, in either way.
If you can afford it, it would be in the US. But I don't know if I believed in anything. I suppose the thing that I believed that I found out was bullshit, I think just after university, I probably wasn't sold on climate change because I hadn't looked at the evidence or hadn't known how to understand the evidence properly. I also followed the Penn and Teller bullshit episode on climate change, which is pretty bad in lots and lots of places. And believed that. And it took me a while to actually come to see what the evidence actually was and what it meant and understand it a lot better. And now I don't think that it's not real. No, I do accept that it's real.
We also have an audio question, which I'm going to play now.
Hello, Skeptics with a K. Shujin Tribble from Holy Crap the Vlogcast on the other side of the pond. How you doing? I'm listening to you guys talking about the different types of dimensions in entertainment. 2D, 4D, 9D, whatever. Okay. So I got as far as to the whips on the backs of your legs, which, by the way, that sounds like a wonderful weekend right there. I wish I was still married. This is a long story. Anyway, so, Mike, here's the problem that I've got for you, because you are, of course, the Whovian in the group, and I think that you're going to absolutely have a field day with this. If the TARDIS, see where I'm going with this? If the TARDIS moves through space-time, if it moves through space, but at the same time, does that mean for one Planck instant, there is an super elongated TARDIS stretching from wherever it started to wherever it ends up? Reminding you, it's still in the same time. It's traveling between one tick and the next on the clock, but it's moving from one place, say, I don't know, Cardiff, for instance, and relocated to, I don't know, just outside of Betelgeuse. Does that mean that there would be a TARDIS stretching for light years until it gets there? I mean, at least, 12 parsecs. So I wanted to put that to you for a second and wonder, what would be the implication if anything were to suddenly ram into, or the TARDIS ran through something like that? Or does it draw a giant squiggly thing, trying to avoid everything that it might otherwise hit? Thank you very much for all the laughs. Cheers.
Well, it's nice of him to send that audio clip from the TARDIS.
The short answer is no.
Doesn't it go into the time vortex?
Yeah, I think that's where I am on it. There's the TARDIS moves through normal space surprisingly little. Sometimes you see it happen.
When they sort of push it.
Well, there was a big car chase down a motorway with a taxi in David Tennant's first story. No, David Tennant's second story, second Christmas special, rather.
Gotcha.
There was a big motorway chase a taxi going down the motorway, and the TARDIS was chasing it. The TARDIS was flying through, like actually moving physically through space.
Right. Yeah.
But the TARDIS does that relatively little. It usually just disappears in one place and reappears somewhere else. So it's not moving through normal four-dimensional space-time. It goes through some alternate spatial route, because I imagine it couldn't travel faster than light through normal space, because that's how that works.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So it goes through some alternate, goes through a back door, whether an artificial wormhole, whatever the fuck it is, however that works. So it doesn't.
Oh no, it doesn't go into the void. The void's a separate thing.
Yeah, the void's the gap between universes. So in that Christmas special, where the TARDIS spent a lot of time actually moving physically through space, afterwards, the Doctor parks it off to one side. And it's looking a bit of a mess, and he goes, "Yeah, I need to leave it to cool down a little bit." She doesn't fly through space an awful lot. I'm just gonna,
wipe the flies from the
yeah. It's basically you have to let the engine cool down a little bit
through the TARDIS wash.
It's a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, but you'd imagine it would. You wouldn't imagine that it would just get really long and become like this impenetrable wall of Tardai. You'd think it would just blip out. But if it was arriving the smallest fraction of time at its destination after it left, then presumably it's going to an offstage area in which time doesn't exist.
Yes,
and it can stay there as long as it likes to get to.
Rather than it moving instantaneously from one place to another, and so therefore in the instant. It is moving through all of those and kind of smears across space.
Like when your laptop is sort of running a bit slow and you try and drag a window and it goes like,
that. Exactly like that. Yeah. But also Whovian. No. Don't use the word Whovian. No one uses the word Whovian.
Doctorian?
American Doctor Who fans use the word Whovian.
Oh, dear me.
The Derby Doctor Who fan group call themselves the Hoovers.
The Hoovers.
Their logo's the proper Hoover logo, which with a W at the front of it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It's because we tend to take the piss out of ourselves.
By little Henry Hoover with a scarf on.
But yeah, the thing like Star Trek fans are called Trekkers and...
They're called Trekkers, not Trekkies.
Well, they were called Trekkies originally, and then that got a reputation for being a bit kind of like, oh, you sad anorak, especially in kind of the late 80s, early 90s. It was like, fucking hell.
So let's switch one letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they changed it. They started
You'll never find us.
No, I'm not a Trekkie, I'm a Trekker. Not like those sad Trek. Look at them there with their fucking Spock ears on. No, I like the modern Star Trek, which is cool, and where the nose...
the Wharf-head.
The nose prosthetics look much better than the ear prosthetics did. But that's fallen by they've fallen by the wayside now, rather. But it's not something that British fans tend to do. So in my experience.
So other than Hoovers, is there any other collective term for?
No, it's just Doctor Who fan.
Doctor Who
fan.
Just
said Doctor Who fan. That's all. I really like Doctor Who. All right, yeah. I mean, I really like Doctor Who, but it's still Doctor Who's on this weekend. I'm so
You've got Doctor. You're pulling your Doctor Who socks.
I'm pulling my Doctor Who socks. Pull your Doctor Who socks up.
You're wearing matching socks, and they're both Doctor Who.
They're both Doctor Who.
You never wear
socks.
matching socks.
But Doctor Who's on this weekend, and I'm so excited for it. It's going to be brilliant. I hope.
I won't be watching it. Actually, I won't be watching it because I'll be in London.
What are you doing in London?
I'm doing God Awful Movies at Conway Hall.
Oh, so you are.
So me and Andy have been invited by the God Awful Movies team to come on stage and talk about Loose Change.
Yeah.
Is the film what we're doing. And Eli is going to be putting forward, I believe, the thesis that Andy Wilson was responsible for September 11th.
Right.
Because nobody yet has adequately been able to point out where Andy Wilson was.
Well, you can't prove he wasn't.
11th. No, exactly. Yeah.
So, he must be.
And we know he's got a track record for all manner of dangerous criminal activity if you listen to any time he's ever mentioned on a show that Eli's on.
I also assume that the reason you and Andy are going down is because Eli and the GAM crew listen to Incredulous and Be Reasonable, but not this show.
That is literally the case, Mike. That is absolutely the case. Also, you say no to everything.
That's true.
And Alistair, get ready for Australia.
I quite often say no to a lot of stuff, mostly because it's like, that sounds really cool, but
you'll miss Doctor Who.
I'm so busy, and Doctor Who's on. I mean, if GAM was clashing with Doctor Who, I'd be watching it on iPlayer during the recording. They can fuck off.
Yeah. Well, I think there might still be some tickets for that available. So if you look for God Awful Movies Live London, do some Googling around that. You'll find it. I mean, you're smart, intelligent people.
So, Liverpool Skeptics at the Pub this month is not in the Casa on Hope Street because we're taking the month off.
It's not in the anywhere.
We're taking the month off.
We'll be doing our usual social event tonight.
There is a social event this evening, which is in Dr. Duncan's on St. John's Lane, but we're not doing a talk this month, mostly because I'm fully spent in terms of energy and resources on QED. To be honest,
it will be like the week that QED finishes, basically.
Yeah. There's no way I'm moving for that entire week, basically.
I'm already. It's not so much that I'm fully spent. I'm actually already in debt in terms of kind of the physical and emotional resources that I have to drain on to draw on.
We did talk about putting on a social instead, and people are welcome to put on a little rebel social, but you guys are going to be totally broken from QED. I'm not going to be in the country, so there's not many people to actually run that event left.
No, but if people want to go for a drink, they're welcome to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always true. That is always true.
Yep. But we will be back with a talk on our regular schedule in November.
That's true.
And Alice, you're going to Australia.
Mm-hmm. I finally booked my
your hotel. I saw that the other day.
Nice.
You're like, I booked my hotel.
I left it really, really, really late.
I mean, you left it with a week to go, basically.
Well, yeah.
That's ridiculous. When were you invited to Australia?
I don't know.
It was before Christmas, wasn't it?
9 months ago, at least.
Have you written an ending yet?
No. I've got a 30-hour flight.
Save that one for the plane.
You've been saying that for 6 months, so I've got like 6 months to write an ending.
No, I've got. I think basically I always had an ending. I just didn't sell the ending. So I think it's fine.
I've got an ending to my Flat Earth talk.
My talk possibly needs entirely rewriting because a lot has changed in the cancer and pseudoscience and skeptical.
You had plenty of warning on that. Since you did some of the work on that and you were checking it over.
I did do some of the work on it, but I didn't know what kind of coverage it was going to get until it got it. So it does need a bit of work, but it'll be fine. And I've got somewhere to stay now, so that's useful.
So that's the Australian Skeptics National Convention, which is on the concourse at Chatswood on October 13th and 14th, which is the same weekend as QED.
It is.
They're exploring science, reason and critical thinking. I don't know where they get that kind of copy from.
How dare they rip off our strapline? God, I think it's awful.
Absolute disgrace. But tickets for that are still available, and so if you're in Australia or fancy flying to Australia, you can go and see Alice. And that's
other cool people.
There's lots of other people as well.
I mean, it's mostly Alice.
That's true.
To be honest,
I'm the main event.
You're top of the list on the list of speakers. You're the first one on there.
Just because my name begins with an A, though?
Possibly. I've not checked if it's alphabetically ordered. I just know top of the list. That confirms my existing biases, so that works for me. So you can find more information about that at convention.skeptics.com.au. Aside from that, then, that is all we have time for.
I think it is.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.